The fluorescent lights of St. Mary's Hospital cast a pale, artificial glow down the pediatric ward as David Carter cradled his 3-year-old son, Mason, in his arms, making his way down the long hallway. At 36, the toll of sleepless nights and burdens too heavy to bear was evident on David's face. Mason, in his favorite Superman pajamas, seemed almost out of place in the sterile hospital setting with their vibrant blue colors. Despite his illness, there was still a glimmer of curiosity in the young boy's eyes. A spark that filled David's heart with love and an ache of concern. "Daddy, are the doctors going to make me feel better?" Mason asked softly, his voice echoing in the quiet corridor. David shifted his son's weight, careful not to jostle the 4-line that had been inserted earlier. "Of course, buddy. The doctors here are very good at what they do. They're going to take great care of you." For the past 6 months, David had been fighting a battle he never imagined facing on his own. Mason had been diagnosed with a rare blood disorder, one that demanded frequent hospital visits and specialized treatment. While David's insurance covered some basics, the mounting medical bills had become overwhelming. To care for Mason, David had to take time off work, leaving them with no income. Their savings had run out weeks ago. Tonight, Mason's fever had soared to a dangerous level, and David couldn't afford to wait until morning. As they walked deeper into the hospital, David tried to suppress the fears that gnawed at him every day. What if he couldn't afford the necessary treatment for Mason? What if he failed as a father at the one time his son needed him most? They passed the administrative wing of the hospital, where through the glass doors, David noticed a group of well-dressed people gathered for what seemed to be a formal meeting. He assumed they were board members, discussing budgets and policies, while families like his struggled with the complexities of medical care. Suddenly, Mason straightened in David's arms and pointed toward the glass doors. "Daddy, look." David followed Mason's gaze, wondering what had captured his attention. "That's Mommy," Mason said, his voice filled with certainty. David's heart stopped. The woman Mason was pointing at was clearly someone important. She was surrounded by other executives and speaking with the kind of confident authority that comes with wealth and power. She was in her early 30s, with blonde hair neatly pulled back, her polished appearance a stark contrast to the hospital's sterile environment. "No, sweetie, that's not Mommy," David said gently, though his voice caught in his throat. Mason's mother had left them when he was barely a year old, unable to manage the demands of motherhood, choosing instead to focus on her career. Since then, David had heard nothing from her. But Mason shook his head, determined and insistent, as children sometimes are when they know something adults seem to forget. "That's Mommy. I remember her smell. I remember her voice." Just then, the woman in the meeting room glanced up, and her eyes locked with David's through the glass. For a brief moment, her composed demeanor cracked, and he saw something flicker on her face: recognition, surprise, and perhaps even a trace of pain. She excused herself from the meeting and made her way toward the door. As she got closer, it became clear: Mason had been right. Despite the expensive clothes and professional demeanor, it was Sarah Mitchell, the woman who had given birth to Mason and then vanished from their lives. "David," she said softly, her voice barely audible. "Sarah," David replied, his voice thick with emotion, feelings he thought he had buried long ago rising to the surface. Mason, still in his father's arms, reached out his small hands toward Sarah, his face glowing with joy. "Mommy, I knew it was you." Sarah's calm, controlled facade completely shattered. Tears welled up in her eyes as she gazed at the little boy she hadn't seen in over 2 years. "Mason," she whispered, her voice trembling. David stood motionless, holding Mason between them, uncertain of what to do or say. The woman before him seemed like a stranger now, vastly different from the young mother who had left. She was clearly successful, perhaps even wealthy, judging by her high-end clothes and the fact that she was leading what appeared to be a hospital board meeting. "What are you doing here?" Sarah asked, though even as the words left her lips, she seemed to realize the answer. Her eyes noticed Mason's hospital bracelet and the 4-line, and her face turned ashen. "Mason is sick," David said simply. "He's been in and out of hospitals for months. His fever got dangerously high tonight, so I brought him to the ER." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. "What's wrong with him?" "A blood disorder," David explained. His voice remained calm, despite the strangeness of the situation. The doctors say it's treatable, but the ongoing care and medication are more than I can afford. Sarah's gaze softened as she looked at Mason, still reaching out to her with trust and love as if she had never been gone. "Can I hold him?" she asked, her voice hesitant. David paused for only a moment before gently transferring Mason into Sarah's arms. The little boy immediately nestled against her, as though some part of him remembered the comfort of his mother's embrace. "I missed you, Mommy," Mason said quietly, his tiny hand resting on Sarah's cheek. Sarah closed her eyes, holding him close, as tears streamed down her face. "I missed you too, baby. More than you could ever imagine." David watched this emotional reunion with a mix of conflicting feelings. A part of him was angry at Sarah for leaving them when they needed her most, but another part, the part that saw how much Mason needed his mother, felt something like relief. "Sarah," David said quietly. "What happened? Where have you been?" Sarah opened her eyes, looking at David over Mason's head. "After I left, I threw myself into work. I started a medical consulting firm, and it grew faster than I ever imagined. I became successful, wealthy even. But I convinced myself that you and Mason would be better off without me." She paused, gently stroking Mason's hair. "I told myself I was too selfish, too focused on my career to be a good mother. I thought if I stayed away, you would find someone better for Mason. But you never reached out to us," David said, his voice tinged with hurt. "I was afraid," Sarah admitted. "Afraid you would reject me. Afraid Mason wouldn't remember me. Afraid I would hurt you both again." Mason looked up at Sarah, his eyes serious. "Are you going to stay this time, Mommy?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah looked from Mason to David, then back to her son. "If your daddy will let me," she said softly, "I would like to stay. I would like to help take care of you and make sure you get all the medicine you need to feel better." David studied Sarah's face, looking for any hint that this was just another temporary decision she would abandon when things became difficult. But what he saw was real remorse, mixed with a determination that hadn't been there 3 years ago. "Mason needs his mother," David finally said. "And frankly, I need help. I can't do this on my own anymore." Over the next few weeks, Sarah gradually rejoined their lives. She used her wealth and connections to ensure that Mason received the best possible care from top specialists across the country. She also used her influence as a significant hospital benefactor to support other families facing similar struggles. But more importantly, she began the slow process of rebuilding her relationship with Mason and regaining David's trust. She attended every doctor's appointment, learned how to administer Mason's medications, and spent countless hours reading to him and playing his favorite games. 3 months later, Mason's condition had improved significantly, thanks to the excellent care he was receiving. The three of them sat together in Mason's hospital room, reading stories as Mason received his weekly treatment. "Daddy," Mason said, looking up from his book. "Are we a family again?" David and Sarah exchanged looks. They had been having thoughtful conversations about the future, taking things slowly and focusing primarily on Mason's well-being. "We're working on it, buddy," David replied gently. "What do you think about that?" Mason smiled his bright, innocent smile that had carried them through the darkest of times. "I think families help each other when someone's sick, and families stay together." Sarah reached over and took David's hand. "Mason is very wise for a 3-year-old. David squeezed her hand gently. "Yes, he is. He knew who you were, even when I didn't believe him." "Children see with their hearts," Sarah said softly. "Maybe we should all try to do that more often." 6 months later, Mason was declared to be in full remission. Sarah had set up a foundation to support other families facing medical crises, and she had managed to balance her thriving career with her role as a mother. David had returned to work, but now with the peace of mind that Mason would always have the care he needed. More importantly, he had come to understand that sometimes people leave not because they don't love you, but because they don't yet know how to love themselves. As they walked out of the hospital together after Mason's final treatment, the little boy looked up at both his parents and said, "I told you that was Mommy. I never forgot her." Sarah knelt down and hugged Mason tightly. "And I never forgot you, sweetheart. Not for a single day." Sometimes, David reflected, the most important reunions happen in the most unexpected places. And sometimes it takes a child's unwavering faith to remind adults that love, real love, never truly disappears. It just waits patiently for the right moment to find its way home.